Hello and welcome to this ECFR webinar entitled How the EU Should Approach China, the Visegrad Perspectives. I am Janka, the director of the Asia program, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the ECFR Warsaw office team, Piotr Buras, and my colleague Maciej here, who have pulled this off and put all of this together. Thank you very much for doing that. It is 3:30. We will start on the dot because this is the German rule here in the ECFR. When the Germans are involved, we start on time. We're very happy to welcome all of you. And I'm delighted to be able to moderate this stellar panel on this timely day. It is timely to talk about European member states' relations with China, not because China is always important, and it seems like the whirlwind of developments over the last few months is barely giving us time to breathe and think through what is happening.
Ale musimy zrobić test przed wyjazdem.
It is also timely to
Musimy test zrobić jutro.
Oh yes, thank you, Piotr. That is helpful. I could hear more voices here. So it is also a very timely moment today to talk about China, because it is the day of the Germany-China government consultations, the cabinet meeting that is going on, underscoring the special relationship that Berlin sees for itself in EU relations with Beijing. The tone this morning here in Berlin was frank and friendly. The importance of the comprehensive agreement on investment was stressed and the economic cooperation lauded. The word partnership was used with no second thoughts, and the human rights dimension was referred to as a traditional topic that would be discussed. Maybe we can speak a bit later with our panel about how this is perceived in those capitals of the EU that have been and are blamed to be under too much Chinese influence with divisive potential. This debate today, this conversation will be held on the record and in English with a simultaneous translation into Polish. You can choose the channel, the language channel, by clicking on the little globe and choose the interpretation channel that you want. After an initial round or two among the panelists and myself, we would then open it up to the audience for questions, which can be posted in the Q&A box. And I am sure that the panel will be able to answer all of the questions and will give you at least varying perspectives on the subject. Let me briefly introduce you to our fantastic speakers. To my left is Ivana Karásková. She's the founder and project leader of Map Influence, an international project mapping China's influence in Central Europe, and of China observers in Central, East, and Eastern Europe, CHOICE. And she's a research fellow at the Association for International Affairs, AMO, in Prague. She holds a PhD in international relations from Charles University in Prague and continues to lecture there on China's foreign policy. More importantly, though, Ivana is just one of the top voices in the European China debate, who moves the needle on the discussion with cutting edge and very in-depth research. So Ivana, welcome here on our panel. The second in the row is Jakob Yakubovsky. He's a senior fellow with OSW China program and a coordinator of the Connectivity in Eurasia project. He's finalizing his PhD thesis on Chinese foreign economic policy towards developing countries. And he previously worked as an exports consultant for Polish small and medium-sized enterprises on markets of Eastern Asia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. He is someone to definitely follow on Twitter because he does not only have very smart things to say, he also does so with taut wit and wise humor. And I've just said earlier in our previous conversation, it's one of the Twitter feeds where I always translate the Polish tweets into English as well, just because they make me smile while thinking about China. And last but certainly not least, Tamás Matura is an assistant professor at Corvinus University of Budapest, a lecturer of the ESSCA School of Management and a founding member of the European think tank network on China. He has been working on Asia for a decade and served as an advisor on China to the Minister of National Economy and as an editor of the China Strategy of Hungary and as an author of the BRICS Strategy of Hungary. He has also been serving as an academic advisor of the Research Center of United Nations and International Organizations at Beijing Foreign Studies University since 2018. And Tamás is the key voice when it comes to explaining Hungary's China policy to pretty much, I would say, the world. So I think it is fantastic to have the three of you here to unpuzzle what's going on with the V4 countries and China relations and how this all fits in the broader EU picture. All three of them will give us a short take on what is the place of Central and Eastern Europe in the new context of the EU-US-China relationship, And what are the specific interests of the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary vis-à-vis China? They will all start with short introductory remarks, and we will then do a round on the panel. And Ivana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Janka, for this, I'm blushing still, for this really nice words. And it's great to be on panel with Kuba and Tamás, because we do know our arguments well, because we met a couple of times on different panels. So this is going definitely to be interesting discussion. So as for your original question, what is the place of Central and Eastern Europe in the context of EU, US, China relations, or this triangle? Well, I think we have to start really with the egg, with the crucial problem, and that's that we still do have a division between old member states and new member states, so old Europe, new Europe. Partially, there is still a mistrust and prejudice from the old members directed towards new members. And partially, this is something the CEE countries actually created themselves. They also have to be blamed for keeping this division going, for showing lack of solidarity occasionally, for democratic backsliding, for the lack of ambitions to shape EU policy, and just complain about not having power and not actually going to seize it, not actually provide some viable options to the whole European Union. Geopolitically, we are still in a historically contested region among great powers. So we are used to be contested, taken over by Germany, I say hi, Turkey, Soviet Union, Russia, and also recently US and China as well. So we do see politics through the prism of size and power of the neighboring countries, and also security risks which are associated with it. And China, on the other hand, has been a newcomer. We do not know how to grapple with China yet. We are on the learning curve. We started to understand what it means to have China actually inside the four countries. But to a certain extent, we are still insulated, safely insulated from the immediate effects of its power. Plus, we do have leadership who are increasingly Eurosceptic, and this is a dangerous combo. So instead of still looking to the West, still thinking about how we can influence the European Union debates, we are increasingly looking outside of the EU, looking to the East, to China, but also to Russia in general. At least some of the countries do that. And we were originally very enthusiastic about 17+1 in China's entering this region. There was a huge expectation of Chinese investment coming to this region without seemingly any strings attached. Of course, we do know that China cared about Taiwan, about South China Sea or human rights records, but that seems to be a small price to pay for attracting China. And also what the leaders in Central and Eastern Europe usually pinpoint quite rightly to, we were not doing anything wrong because already Germany, UK, and France did the same, so why should we be blamed? And the narrative is still here, and it still has been picked up on numerous occasions by different political leaders that we as Central Europeans have to somehow act, otherwise the other parties will seize the benefits of cooperation with China, namely the old member states. So this is not ideological affinity. Not even in Orban's Hungary, there is no naivety, no love for Xi Jinping's China, but that's stemming really from our reading of international relations, that the big powers do whatever they please to do, and we have to deal with that, and also from hard-nosed expectations of economic benefits. But China proved to be a problematic partner. Already we started to lose reputation. We were we were described as sellouts to China, though the reality, and we can talk about FDI, which were consumed by CEE countries in comparison to Western Europe, the reality actually talks differently. And we were also pictured as security risks to European Union and to NATO. This also had an effect on domestic politics because of the non-transparent deals, which China is famous for, influence over local politicians, especially on issues of Chinese core interests, such as Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, and also South China Sea, and attempts to influence academia and media. And put on that combo that the fact that China has not been delivering on economic promises. So we do see that the attitude of Central and Eastern Europe has been changing towards China. And this is also in line with the changing attitude of the US and EU and general worsening of relations with China. So we are currently caught in a kind of schizophrenic situation in economic/security dilemma. Economically, we tend to bandwagon, we tend to ally with Germany. We are by a large extension of German markets through the supply chains. But security-wise, Germany is not willing to play the role of security guarantor. So we are still looking at US to provide exactly that. That's the crucial part of our foreign policy and positioning in international relations. So this is a very uneasy position to be caught in, because we need to, let's say, please or take into consideration, to be a little bit more diplomatic about that, US interests, but also interests of Germany. And when we are currently standing as a Czech Republic, I would like to argue a little bit, perhaps in an unpopular way, that the original thinking about inviting China or letting China enter the Czech Republic was quite rational. It was an attempt to economically diversify relations, not really be dependent that much on Germany and Western European markets after the global financial crisis, but to look increasingly into post-Soviet space, back to Russia, and also later on to China as well. And there was a real sense of that we can somehow get a piece of that China's big pie. And it was also a part of everyone was doing that before us, part of this narrative domestically. So the interest of Czech businessmen were really playing a huge part also in this decision to, let's say, open up the gates to China. And it was matched by the Chinese interest in Central and Eastern Europe. And in order to have a competitive advantage, we overdid the zeal to China. We opened too much. We didn't ask the crucial questions of what kind of investment we actually want to have in the Czech Republic, how the deals are concluded, who are the crucial personas who are benefiting personally from specific deals with China. And this is basically how it started. And interests so far are still mostly economic ones. We do not rely on attracting Chinese investment. I think we learned a lesson with CEFC/CITIC entrance to the Czech market, and it turned out that CEFC was actually a Ponzi scheme and had to be bailed out by CITIC. So we learned that lesson quite hard. But what our businessmen and also politicians are looking for is increased market, to increase access to Chinese market. So that's also the reason why there was no discussion about a comprehensive agreement on investment in the Czech Republic, because everybody silently approved that. We were thinking, or the narrative was, that whatever benefits German car manufacturers is benefiting us as well. So, well, we don't touch that. We are absolutely fine with a TAI agreement as it was negotiated. So this is the reality. I would like to really stress and conclude by this: there is no ideological affinity apart from certain, let's say, minor political players. That was, still is, and will be hard-nosed expectation of economic benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. And I think that's a really good kind of reality check as well, because we often have this kind of overlay in the debates, particularly here in Berlin as well, but sometimes also in other places in Europe, that there may be some sort of ideological affinity, that there may be a sort of elite capture going on. But in the end, it's economic interests, about economic interests in the Czech Republic just as much as it is about economic interest in Berlin as well. Let's turn over to Jakub and the Polish perspective. So maybe just from your angle, where do you situate the kind of the Polish debate on China in the EU-US-China relationship? And what is the kind of specific Polish interest? Is it also just economics, or is there more to it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed Ivana's introduction, which is, was touched upon the broad context, the strategic context, the way Central Europe thinks. I do agree. We also do think in that way, and especially concerning the great power competition. But anyways, I'll try to focus more on what has actually changed in the last 2 to 3 years in these regions' position on China. Of course, we are talking about at least 12 countries, and if we take 17 plus 1 to account, it's actually 17. So it's hard to have any argument that will fit each and every one of them. But I think, generally speaking, what we are seeing now is Central Europe, Europe's position towards China being framed in a very different way than from compared to Germany or France or other Western European countries. So first of all, very simplistically, China's policy toward Europe is now a two-pronged approach, influencing Europe through economic interdependencies by both carrots and sticks, and also influencing Europe by feeding some Europeans' ambition to transform Europe into a autonomous pole into this great power competition that is autonomous, mostly from the US. So in terms of Central Europe, we basically have none of those two, because in terms of economic interdependencies, just what Ivana said, we tried for 10 years to have a deep and mutually beneficial cooperation with China in terms of economics, and we kind of failed. I mean, I think we learned that there's not much potential for countries like us to benefit from cooperating with China in a general sense, in sense of long-term structural growth drivers. So in a way, we ended up after roughly 10 years of having our separate dialogue with China, we ended up with virtually no interdependencies. I mean, if you look at the position of China in our exports, China's role as a foreign investor, a technological player, it's minuscule. So it now in 2021, it gives you a very special flavor to the relations, because back in 2012, China was relatively mild, while now it uses every interdependence it can find to affect European policy, with Germany being the primary example here. And we do not share this predicament in a way. Some countries do, but even in Hungary, I think China is still marginal in terms of the general structure of the economy. So in a way, this kind of gives Central Europe, quite paradoxically, a free hand to handle political relations with China, because we are not tied to that, to China, to Chinese economy. We are not dependent on it. And as a result, you will see, Central European capitals changing their policies much more rapidly, reacting to the global, political developments, especially the US-China confrontation, also this assertive turn that we've seen in Europe, and we still do see this assertive turn simultaneously with the non-assertive kind of continuation that is happening. But all in all, I think this lack of dependence provided Central Europe with ample space for pushing for, first of all, a more resilient European Union, and just raising the issues of a negative influence that China can have on the European economy and the political systems. And secondly, it kind of gave Central Europe a free hand in terms of talking about China with the United States, where in the US policy, China is, of course, is central. Everything else basically is subject to China. So it's a central theme in the transatlantic relationship now too. So we are having much more space in terms of securing a continuous good transatlantic relationship that we, by the way, care for, because we are NATO's eastern flank and we are threatened by basically by Russia. So we do care about the US being present there. So that was the general matrix that I used to talk about Central Europe. Of course, Tamás will speak in a minute, and he'll, prove me wrong in every aspect possible by talking about Hungary. But I think it applies to many countries. We've seen this anti-Chinese shift in Baltic states, in Romania, in Slovakia, partially Poland, Czech Republic in many ways, although it's very divided internally. So I think this generally applies to many countries. And in terms of Poland, my personal take on Polish interests is the following. We do have some mutually beneficial economic cooperation, which is, it's not systemic in terms of our economy. It's just like a side project that some companies or sectors of economy run. For example, in terms of food exports, China is generally interested in three things: raw resources, food, and lumber. Those are the three things that it's always eager to import from our region. It's not an ideal world to be a provider of raw materials to China, but still it's happening and developing slowly. And I think, our government kind of cursed for that. But still, in terms of the general, diversification of Polish exports, it's still like 2%. So that's basically not a big deal. And same goes with transport connectivity. In a way, our links, both maritime links and railway links with China, are fueling the expansion of Polish ports and transportation companies, which is also a nice thing to have, but in no way, of an utmost importance for economy in general. And what I have in mind are those interdependencies that China can weaponize to kind of influence the policy. I don't think they're there. And apart from that positive agenda, let's say, which is kind of limited, just a concluding thought on the two things I was talking about before. So pushing for a more resilient EU when it comes to foreign influence, also a strategic autonomy in terms of value chains, diversification, and generally speaking, providing the EU with not only a shield that will, agreements with China that provides European companies with some legal shield, but also having a sword that will make sure that will show China that Europe is ready to retaliate every time those interdependencies are used. So having a more resilient EU and having a pragmatic dialogue with the US on how to tackle China, but pragmatic, I mean, communicating to the US that it also needs to do a lot of things, and there's a bucket list for them to do before we can talk, and including things like digital taxation and taxation in general. But anyways, I think that's my understanding on when we're heading at, and hopefully that also applies to many Central European countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakub, and I like how you speak about the beauty of non-dependence and the freedoms of Eastern Europe. I do think that we could go back to that, because that is an important point of how a huge disadvantage could turn into a massive advantage at a certain point. And I do think that the aspect of the way that China is able to weaponize economic relationships with the EU and how Eastern Europeans can actually help in that regard is an interesting and important point to raise. Now, we turn to Tamás, and I think a few things look a tiny bit different from where you sit at. Or would you agree with most of the things that have been said by your colleagues? Tamás, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janka, and thank you for having me today. And it's a lovely coincidence that what I'm going to say in the upcoming few minutes, I think fits perfectly into the foundations laid out by Ivana and Jakub, and especially what Jakub just mentioned about the tendency of Central and Eastern European countries to change their foreign policy rapidly, like a pendulum. As Ivana mentioned, we were overly zealous about working together with China, and now it seems that the pendulum is swinging back towards the West, towards the United States of America. And also what Jakub mentioned about the free hand, that China cannot really use any punitive measures in Central and Eastern Europe. And these are all true, but let me invite another kind of dimension into the discourse, because I think in Central and Eastern Europe, besides America, besides the EU, and besides China, there is one more very important player, and that is Russia. We shouldn't forget about that. The Central and Eastern European region, and I'm quite sure that our Polish friends perfectly understand it. So Russia has always played a very important geopolitical role in our region. And it seems that the world is entering once again a period where geopolitics is about to play a pivotal role in the foreign policy of many countries, first and foremost the United States and China, of course, and Russia. In the recent weeks and months and even years, I think Russia has proven that its geopolitical intentions towards the Central or rather Eastern European regions are still there, and we have to pay attention to that. Meanwhile, China doesn't pose a geopolitical concern or challenge to the Central European region, at least not in traditional sense. Russia does, and if we look at the recent events, for example, that Foreign Minister Lavrov rushed to Beijing, actually, if I'm not mistaken, days after the sanctions by China were imposed on European entities and individuals. I think that this is something we have to take into consideration, because if we consider the worst case scenario, a real clash between the United States and China, I think it is fair to think about the opportunity, or not the opportunity, but at least about the chance of some Russian activities in Central and Eastern Europe. So, and that leads to my conclusion about this question, that we have to be very, very careful when Central and Eastern European countries formulate or reformulate their China policy today. So I would warn about being overly zealous, bashing China today, because it is indeed true, as Jakub mentioned, that some of the Central and Eastern European countries, or many of the Central and Eastern European countries, tend to be eager beavers. 10 years ago, we were very, very happy to work together with China. Now some Central and Eastern European countries turn towards the US and start to spread some, China bashing news. And at the very same time, there is an escalation going on vis-à-vis Russia. The Czech Republic, for example, and other Visegrad countries started a kind of a political escalation against Russia. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we have to appease Russia. This is definitely not true. We have to stand up to our values, and we have to stand up our interests all around the region and beyond, whether it comes to China, whether it comes to Russia. But what I would like to emphasize, that if Central and Eastern European countries end up being, the most vocal bashers of China or Russia at the very same time, at the very end, we may create an international environment where the Central and Eastern European region itself could find itself in trouble. So I think the region should be very, very careful. And probably our best interest is to find a smart way to stand up to our values and our interests vis-à-vis Russia and China, but at the very same time not creating an international environment where the region itself could be maybe even in physical danger. And when it comes to the other question, Hungary's interest, well, I think we are all aware that Hungary plays a, well, let me put it this way, a very special role in EU-China relations. And the current Hungarian government has been playing that role. And I think that's important to emphasize, that it is the government. So I know it's easy to always, phrase that Hungary does this, Hungary does that, but in reality, it is about the government. And then here comes a million-dollar question, elections next year. Hungary is about to have general elections in a year, so next May. And probably for the very first time in 12 years, there is a slight chance for the government, the incumbent government, losing the elections next year. I don't think it will happen, but it may happen. This is the very first time in 12 years when, this option is on the table at all. So should the government lose the elections and the opposition take control of the Hungarian foreign policy, I expect fundamental changes in our China policy, because there is no public support behind the pro-China policies of the government today. Even the media does not support it, as our research together with Ivana has proven it before. So I believe that the opposition will follow a very, very different China policy and it will be a way more pro-Western, pro-EU, pro-NATO. However, should the government pull in the next elections, I think the so-called peacock's dance of our prime minister will continue. This is a very opportunistic foreign policy, and I think it's the very nature of opportunistic foreign policies that it can keep going as long as or unless someone stops it. So do not expect the Hungarian government to change its mind on its own about China or Russia or Turkey for that matter, because China is only one part of the very opportunistic foreign policies of the Hungarian government. Unless the EU or, well, practically Germany decides to stop it in a certain way or through certain measures, or the United States, and finally America returns to Central and Eastern Europe, there is a chance to change the attitude of the Hungarian government. But frankly speaking, given the past decade and experiences, and well, I may even say the collusion between the Hungarian government and the German industrial interest groups, I don't really expect any changes to happen anytime soon in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamás. And I think I have probably written down 10 or 12 follow-up questions that I have immediately that have been prompted immediately. Let's do one little round here among us. I already see questions coming in, but I would like to remind our participants, and I see a number of names in the list of attendees here that resonate very well and that I know very well. So please do all feel free to use the Q&A box and pose your questions as well. But let me maybe start in reverse order, Tamás. There's two things that that immediately kind of came to my head when you were speaking. Is you say there should be a smart way of standing up to our values and interest when it comes to China and Russia. What would that smart way look like? And then the other question is for the Hungarian government. And then you said, you know, there is Germany or the US could stop or disincentivize this government from approaching the China policy the way it does. How? Just as a little bit of advice here, sitting in Berlin, maybe that can be translated as well.
Well, regarding your second question, well, that's a very good question. How to incentivize the Hungarian government to stop its very pro-China or pro-Russia or pro-Turkey policies? Yeah, I think most of the opposition in Hungary has been looking for the answer to this question. It's really hard to tell, but actually the answer at the very same time is very simple. It's about European funds and structural funds, because I think every expert agrees that the current Hungarian government and its whole system, the system it has built in the past 12 years is actually fueled by EU funds. So, but then comes the problem, what I alluded to a minute ago, that according to many experts in Hungary, I'm not an expert on German-Hungarian relations, but I read a lot about it. And according to these experts, the main and fundamental problem is that all the funds coming to Hungary actually end up back in Germany. This is a round stripping of money. And the Hungarian government, even though it depicts itself as conservative government, when it comes to industrial policies, it's extremely neoliberal. So you cannot imagine the immense amount of money poured into multinational companies, and first and foremost into German multinational companies. So the question maybe is not how to incentivize the Hungarian government, but how to disincentivize the German government in helping maintaining the Hungarian system as we know it today. So sorry for this boomerang answer. Yeah. So what do you think? How to stop the German government and German interest group in helping the Hungarian government to maintain its system? And yeah, the smart thing about it, well, what I really mean by that is that Central European foreign policy decision makers should be very careful not to be overzealous about bashing China and to try to fit into the narrative of the United States of America that China is an enemy or China is an evil or a dangerous country. We should try to stick to some kind of realistic approach, what takes into consideration still available economic opportunities, because economic opportunities are still there about China, and also takes into consideration a potential scenario in the maybe not that distant future when Central and Eastern Europe could find itself in a very dangerous position vis-à-vis Russia, because, you know, let me be very frank about this. I hope that we can avoid a real clash between America and China. But if that happens, I don't believe America would be in a position to protect Europe anymore, especially Central and Eastern Europe. And I think this is a very important message, because I tend to have the experience that Western European countries do not regard the security concerns of Central and Eastern Europe that, you know, seriously. But many of these security concerns of Central and Eastern European countries drive Central and Eastern European foreign policy, and Western Europe should be a little bit more sensitive about it. And you see, I'm already using a narrative splitting Europe into two halves, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. But as also Ivana and Jakub mentioned, that we have to face this as a reality, that there are rising fractions between the East and West, or the old and the new parts of Europe.
Thank you, Tamás. Jakub, maybe if we come back a little bit to what you've said, and you can obviously also react to what Tamás has said before, but one of the things that struck me when you were speaking was that there is kind of space that exists for dealing with the United States for Poland. How do you think the Polish government will use this space? What will it use it for? Will it use it for just kind of improving the Polish situation? Will it be a very nationally interested version, or will there be a broader vision for something? Because Ivana talked a lot about kind of a lack of ambition also to actually shape European policy. And the question is, is there a shaping ambition in the Polish government here when it comes to using the space?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'd like to first react to what Tamás said, and he introduced the Russian factor here, which I think is very important and often overlooked. And while I do share his concerns about the U.S., you know, at least a capability to protect Eastern Europe in case of a clash in the Pacific, not their willingness that I'm questioning maybe, but the ability. And I do share this concern. Then there's another concern that when something kinetic happens in Western Pacific, Russia may either use an opportunity created by that or be outright coordinated with China when it comes to escalating on, you know, both fronts of Eurasia. And I think it's a genuine concern that we should talk about, especially as the coordination between Moscow and Beijing is, you know, is expanding super fast on so many levels. And one thing I'd like maybe to react to what Tamás said, but I don't quite get the okay, if I get you wrong, right, I mean that we should not antagonize China, because then if Russia does something, China's, you know, position might actually influence what's happening. That's how I'm reading. Maybe I'm reading that wrong. So, but my problem here is I do share, you know, I also ask myself this question: what would China do? And the only actual cases we had from the previous years were actually Russia's aggressive actions towards Ukraine, Georgia, and Belarus very recently. And China's reaction there was pretty disappointing. And to take the Belarusian case, the latest protests, with official media and the official stance on behalf of China was that it was a color revolution run by the European and American secret services. And Poland and Lithuania were, you know, encouraging everyone to do that. And it's in Russia's legitimate right to intervene if it wants. That was the, you know, Global Times reaction to that. And my conclusion is that, you know, in a way, of course, Ukraine and Belarus is different than Poland and Hungary in so many ways, and also strategically. And China might consider it as two different spheres of influence. But at least within the non-European Eastern Europe, China is perfectly ready to accommodate Russian interests and accept their alleged sphere of influence and gives Russia a free hand in doing what it wants. This applies to both Belarus and Ukraine, for that matter, where China shared Russian narratives on what happened actually there. Also, a EU-sponsored coup d'état that pushed Ukraine towards the West against the will of its people. That were the words I heard in Beijing. So I'd like to follow up on what Tamás said. I think it's extremely important to talk about those things. Just reacting to what Janka has asked me for, I'm not in a best position to describe the Polish government's details on the Polish government's policy there. But I think what we've seen in the last couple of years were both bilateral things, and I think many countries in the region, Romania is a very good case, to use the China card to score points in Washington. And I think Romania is the best case here, but I think it happens in many other cases, probably in Poland too. But I think what's really important here that it's not only bilateral, and we have seen the 3 Cs initiative that is less famous than the 17+1, but still is a direct alternative, at least as the US Congress paints it. It's a direct alternative when it comes to providing Central Europe with both soft and hard connectivity that will be an alternative to what Russia offers, too, yeah, but in terms of energy, but also in terms of transportation and digital connectivity to what China offers. And also a thing that is in line with the general EU policy. So we've seen the 3 Cs initiative joined by the European Commission saying that it's synergetic when it comes to the EU policy. Also, the US saying that it's willing to step in. Maybe the funds they actually allocated are still kind of small. But I think what's really important it's the China card that this region plays when advancing their relations with the US. It's not only bilateral, but it's also about building some lasting multilateral fora that will hopefully be much more, connected with the EU policy, open to European partners such as Germany, the European Commission, to actually advance, the transatlantic cooperation as a whole, and not necessarily divide it. And that will be the worst case scenario, where the platforms like the 3 Cs initiative dividing the EU like the 17+1 did. I think it's a worst case scenario.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Ivana, you have raised many kind of really important framing points, but I think the one aspect that was also taken up by Tamás and Jakub is the question of kind of how divided is Europe really, this kind of divide between the old and the new members, but also the question of the schizophrenia between Germany and kind of the US, so the security and the economic situation. You have a pretty good take on Germany as well, and how it kind of sits in this relationship. What would your expectation be, or what is the expectation from the Czech side when it comes to Germany's policy? What kind of policy change in Germany would actually be good for the Czech Republic's China policy, if that is not too complicated a chain of thought here?
It's not, but you are putting me in a very weird position. But I'm also a fellow at the MERICS, which is supported by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung scholarship. So providing these kind of responses is quite like dancing among the acts. But I'm going to be frank, because it's the easiest way to do here, though perhaps not the most secure one. What I think the Czech government is expecting from any German policy, whoever is in the helm, is to secure the interest of our car manufacturers, because we are essentially Skoda Auto is one of the biggest providers, or one of the biggest contributors to the GDP. So this still is seen as a crucial industry in the Czech Republic. And we do think that any German government will probably protect Volkswagen. So that's the line of thinking there. But on the other hand, we do have a government which is, how to put it, very accommodative towards the Chinese interests. Not necessarily the prime minister, but definitely the coalition, minority coalition partner. And we are heading towards elections as well in October, which might change completely the foreign policy directions. It's still too early to say who is going to win the elections because, you know, in politics, it's still many months to go, anything can change. So it could stay as it is. It could be given to a minor coalition partner to drive the Czech foreign policy, which could be anyone, starting with the Social Democratic Party. So it will be business as usual. It could be far-right party, which could lead towards, you know, this crazy idea of having a Czech exit from the EU. So anything can happen, really. Or it could be the Pirate Party, or the central right party, which will be in the helm. And in that case, we can expect the same change of China foreign policy as we have seen in Lithuania, and also as we have seen after the elections in Slovakia. So much more tougher stance on China, regardless of the costs. Of course, one thing is to argue as an opposition leader of what you will do after the elections. Another one is if you have Skoda Auto and Volkswagen standing in your office and asking you not to provoke China. So we will see. But regarding the change in the German government, I do know what I would expect, what my preferences would be. But in terms of the hard politics, it's still difficult to say what will happen and how this is going to impact the Czech Republic and how will Czech Republic react after the elections.
Thank you, Ivana. And there are a number of questions now in the Q&A box. You're welcome to add a few. We might not be able to tackle all, but let's start with the first round here. And I will just kind of pose two, and then we will, maybe you can just raise your hand if you want to. You can just do it physically, actually, I can see all of you. And then you can say, we will go in that order. So the first question is one that is mainly probably directed at Jakob. Isn't the strong criticism of the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, from Central and Eastern European countries, China watchers, especially from Poland, driven by anti-German resentments? I think that's a really good question. And then the second question that I think is super relevant is, has the coronavirus pandemic changed in any way China's calculations regarding the CEE and regarding the Belt and Road project? And I would flip that question around as well. How much has the coronavirus pandemic had an influence on the opinion, public opinion, and the sentiment within the countries vis-a-vis China? Who wants to go first? We start in the middle, Jakob, you go?
Yeah. I need to my confession on my anti-German sentiments.
Yes.
Well, I think the criticism that was really there in terms of Thai in the Polish China watching community had different sources. One of them being that Thai has basically overlooked a worsening human rights situation inside China, which I think is a concern that many people in Europe share. And I think they're quite legitimate or outright legitimate. Then this is the political and human rights and labor rights oriented strands of criticism, which I think have nothing to do with Germany whatsoever. But the economic ones do have a German link there. I think that Ivana has also touched upon. And my personal take is that there was, and I think there was a similar argument going on in Poland as in Czech Republic, that everything that's good for the German automakers is good for Central Europe, which is, I think, questionable. It might work like that, but we still have to look at the actual results of Thai in terms of automotive. That the line of thinking I'm developing now is whether that will really benefit Central European automotive parts suppliers, because what Thai will do it will enable big European automakers to invest inside China. By big, I mean greenfield projects above $1 billion, which is a threshold that none or a very few of Central European companies can cross. Then the European automakers will then regionalize their value chain even further inside China, building large facilities and looking for their suppliers. And then I had a conversation with BDI once when they said, if Central European suppliers want to stay in German value chains aimed at Chinese market, then they will have to move along with the German producers there, which is much harder for them since they're smaller. They don't have, German bilateral commission with China that will shield them. But also there's smaller, the smaller you are in Chinese market, the easier it is for Chinese suppliers to outcompete you within the supply chain. And this applies mostly to the e-mobility emerging market, the market of the future, where China is already quite strong. So while I do not have a definite answer here, but I think those economic effects may also happen. So it will be, you either invest along with us or you fall out of the German value chains. And in this respect, I have some concerns on how Tsai will affect the Central European economies.
Let's go over to Tamás, if that's okay, Ivana, then because you were already posting stats on how opinion has changed. Tamás, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I try to give you a background. I don't know whether you can read it. So this is about how public understanding and public opinion about China changed because of the coronavirus pandemic. And as you can see, in all of the Visegrad 4 countries, it has deteriorated significantly in the past 3 years. Actually, I had the pleasure to contribute to a huge public opinion survey conducted by Polacky University in the Czech Republic by Richard Turchani and his team. And they covered 13 countries all around Europe, including Serbia and Russia. And actually, Serbia and Russia were the 2 countries where China's image has improved. But in all other European member states, China's image has deteriorated rapidly. And this is mostly because of the coronavirus crisis. Of course, wolf warrior diplomacy and the more assertive Chinese policy may have contributed as well. But it's definitely the coronavirus what deteriorated or made it to deteriorate. But getting back to the original question, how China's policy may have been affected in Central and Eastern Europe by the coronavirus, I believe that China is probably in a damage control situation or damage control mode right now. And I don't think that Central and Eastern Europe is their primary concern right now. If you look at the, well, I can say the quite devastating results of the last 17+1 summit, online summit in February, I believe that Chinese experts and probably the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs is quite busy rethinking and reevaluating the situation in Central and Eastern Europe, but probably this is not their primary concern right now.
Ivana, would you like to add?
I was just thinking about what Kuba said, Jakub, about the effects of Tsai, because I was recently in a debate with the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry, a very smart lady, and I asked her whether they do have some kind of impact study, what Tsai would actually do with the Czech market, and they don't have any. And I don't think they even plan to have some. So what you said come as a huge surprise to me. So I would like to investigate this a little bit more.
I think you're very right there, Ivana. I think that's one of those things where I think it's very surprising how a certain belief in the effects, the positive effects of the agreement has sort of perpetuated itself among member states, whereas I do think that in a number of cases, no proper impact studies have actually been conducted on a national level against the background of the changing economic environment. This has been going on for so many years. So I do think that this really requires a lot of investigation of how much of this is belief and how much of this is knowledge and how much of this is modeling actually in the end.
And if I may add, it reminds me of the situation before Czech Senate President Vystrčil visited Taiwan in 2020, there was a lot of articles written on how we are going to be punished by China, how China is going to sanction us, how this is going to be devastating for Czech economy, how tourists are not going to come to the Czech Republic, even though it was pandemic already, height of the pandemic, so no tourists were coming, period. And so we asked an economist to actually model what the impacts would be, and he came up with very interesting economic simulations saying that the maximum impact we would be hit if China going to sanction everything, all the parts of the supply chains, would be about 1% of Czech GDP, which could be too much or it could be too less, but definitely it's not going to have a devastating effect on the Czech economy. So it would be great to actually put some more data behind that and do some reality checks before the politicians believe that they can't do something because of the punishment or because of the retaliation.
Yeah, I think another one to add would be then the exclusions of Huawei from various networks within the 5G networks within Europe, and very limited consequences in any of the member states that have done so, any of the operators that have chosen to do so. So I think there is a lot of there's a lot of myth busting to be done. But Ivana, I think you're known in Europe for doing a lot of this myth busting work in your research. So I think that's exactly the thing we need to be heading towards. There are a number of questions with regard to 17+1. One of them I find very interesting to think through. In what sense do you think, and it goes back to that kind of shaping question, do you think that there is the ability for at least the EU members, maybe among the 17+1, to arrive at a joint and common position when it comes to China, with regard to economic cooperation with China? Do you think that there is still potential there, or what is the potential of 17+1 in general? Is it withering? Is it a slow dying flower? Or is it something that will actually be reinvigorated and revived? But will it be driven more by the EU members or by the European side at some point? Who would like to take that question? I see Tamás and Jakub. Tamás, you go ahead.
Well, it's easy to answer the question whether there is a chance for a joint Central European position on China. No. Okay, a little bit more detailed. No, unless it fits into the China policies of Hungary itself, because otherwise, just look at what the Hungarian government has been doing about the joint statements of the European Union about China in the past decade or so. Actually, unless such a joint approach of the 17+1 or the 12+1 would be according to Hungarian terms, I think the Hungarian government would easily veto it if there is a veto power in 17+1 at all. That's another question, whether the remaining 11 EU member states could hammer out a joint position, but I also have some doubts about it. We should have done so a decade ago, actually. So,
Jakub, do you share those doubts?
Well, if there is a veto power that Hungary will hold, I am sure it will use. I mean, actually, there are some cases when Hungary uses that, and in other cases it doesn't. And the EU sanctions were instrumental there. I mean, the Prime Minister of Hungary was super skeptical about the sanctions that he approved just a day before. So I think it's all about the cost of vetoing, I would assume. But anyways, the common position, I think the Central Europe should look for to build some shared interests there, to develop them, and also develop platforms in order to communicate on how to deal with China. And the 17+1 is certainly not a platform to do that, because the way the 17+1 is structured is that you always have a Chinese in the room. So it's by design you cannot coordinate against China within the 17+1. So you need other platforms to do that. And ideally that will be European Council along with other European member states. And I do feel, and I think, and I've heard that there were Central European countries that were actually forming some smaller groups within the European Council on China, which is quite positive. That could be, of course, more institutionalized. But when it comes to the fate of 17+1 in general, you know, I've been making this argument over and over, but I'll make it once again. It all depends on how the general EU policymaking on China is done. In some respect, 17+1 is a result of CE being sidelined from the European dialogue on China back in 2011. Then, you know, fast forward, we have the German 27+1 summit idea, when you will have all countries on board. And according to the talks I had in Berlin, it was directly against a direct alternative to 17+1. The German official was saying, it's a FaceTime with Xi Jinping you'll have, so as you don't have to meet at the 17+1 meeting. What this assessment on when countries are doing this was not perfectly right, but at least it was an attempt to create some venue, an imperfect one, overcrowded one, but a venue for all member states to form a common policy. Well, from what I'm hearing and from the last Noah Barkin's newsletter is that in Brussels, nobody really thinks about 27+1 anymore. And it is puzzling, especially as, you know, this whole thing about Lithuania recently leaving 17+1 was, if you look, you know, hard enough, I mean, if you look carefully at what Lithuania said, they said, we are ready to leave 17+1 after the 27+1 is initiated, because we'll rather have an EU-wide dialogue on China than the 17+1. That's the Lithuanian position, also an Estonian position. I think there are many people in Central Europe that share that. But now the 27+1 idea is being phased out, and what we have instead is, you know, ad hoc, the 7th ad hoc French-German-China online meeting that sets the general course of EU policy, which is, I think, the best way to make this, you know, 17+1 live ever after. Thank you.
Thank you. Ivana, I would like to bring you in, but maybe you can also kind of touch upon that point that Jakob just made. Like, how is the German-French approach at the moment faring? Because this is one of the questions being raised here by Milanich in the chat as well. Are they doing well on behalf of the other Europeans? Because Jakob seems very skeptical that this Franco-German individual approach seems to be very much in all of the Europeans' interest here.
Yeah, I will respond in a minute. I just want to add to what Jakub was saying, which is a lot of already, which I agree with. But there are certain elements which I would like to mention. And Tamás, what about Hungary? Let's forget Hungary. You know, it's you know, messy and creates mess everywhere it goes. I'm so sorry for that. But let's forget Hungary for 17+1, so we can focus on the other 11, let's say. The thing is that there already is a coordination, and it was quite obvious before the last virtual summit that Lithuania was coordinating with the other Baltic countries because they didn't want to be breaking the ranks alone, because they believed that there is going to be some kind of retaliation. And already they were creating this kind of discussion mechanisms, what to do with 17+1, how to proceed within 17+1. So there are actually consultations already, and not only within the Baltic countries or Baltic Trio themselves, but there are also consultations done by the EU member states of 17+1 in Beijing, and there are no Chinese in the room. So there are actually already established or semi-formal, let's say, ways through which 17+1 is debated among the EU member states of 17+1. Last but not least, we also did the audits during when we were formulating the Empty Shall No More report, and we found out that China was not successful in injecting the language. It's, you know, win-win cooperation, Belt and Roads, common shared destiny of mankind, and so on, into the documents, final documents of 17+1. And that's not because they were not trying; they were trying very hard, but there was a huge opposition, especially coming from EU member states on this. And sorry about Hungary, but Hungary didn't veto anything. Hungary basically was, you know, just riding on the boat, even with this. As for countries leaving 17+1, I'm going to be very Machiavellistic here. on this. I don't think that it's such a great news for the remaining countries of the format, because let's do some math. So if 3 of them are leaving, though one is signaling it quite vigorously, the other 2 are sort of uneasy to signal anything quite firmly, then we are left with how many? 9, if I'm not mistaken, EU member states. And that's going to create a lot of troubles for them, because China is going to pay much more attention to the format. It's going to, let's say, save the format. It's going to provide much more offers to the remaining countries, and the remaining countries are also going to show much more zeal. At least I can imagine Czech President Zeman doing that to prove that we are reliable ally, though the government may think otherwise. And if China plays this well, it still have a chance to seduce the region. So why leave the format? That's my question. And if we don't believe this is not going to bring us anything from China, why leave it if it actually scares Brussels? Why leave it if it scares Washington? Let's face it, 3C's initiative was a reaction to 17+1. It would not be offered. It would not be on the table if we were not scary enough, to put it this way, if there was not real Chinese influence actually coming to the region. And the same goes for the interest of European Commission and European External Action Service to 17+1. Why they wanted to have observer status? Because they were afraid what 17+1 will come up with. So that's one of the ways how to think about 17+1, not only about what we can extract from China. Obviously, there is not so much if China is not offering, or if it is offering, is it something we want to receive? But what if we use it as a vehicle to get to the table more at the European Union? Of course, we are very diverse countries. We do have, hello Tamás, we do have Budapest, and we do have President Zeman, we do have PiS in Poland and so on. So it's not all rosy, but it's still something we can utilize.
I think it's really good, because you also kind of answered the question that was said, how can C outsmart China? You at least answered how C is outsmarting Europe in a way here, and maybe also kind of politically playing its cards well vis-a-vis China in the end. Maybe we can go to the question. I would like to save the question, but you can already think about it a little bit. What would be the relative key objectives if your country had the power to bring one idea forward or 2 ideas forward on the EU level, and it would sail through immediately because there's, in a fantasy world, no strings attached? What would that one be that your country would push for? But we'll leave that to the final round, but just to flag it to you that we will get there. But then let's maybe go back just really quickly to the question of how the Franco-German approach at the moment is seen from the capitals, particularly maybe Jakub from a Polish perspective, because the question from Milan here was also said, do you feel that Poland's position is locked out on the EU level? Is that a concern? How is that perceived?
Well, once again, I'm speaking on behalf of Jakub Yakubovsky only. But
sorry, I don't want to put you in the position of speaking on behalf of the Polish government here.
Yeah, of the Polish people. Yeah, but still, my personal concern is that China is a big deal in the way the EU sets up its policy towards China will generally affect the EU policy as such to other countries, towards other countries too. If this format is successful, then why not Russia? And what we see now is actually France and Germany trying to do the same thing, to shape EU's policy towards Russia within this small exclusivist format. And that's, while some, of course, those are, there are benefits of having small groups of countries deciding, but I think the benefit will be for them to share the burden, but then coordinate with the rest. But before, first to forge a common approach, and then to do the heavy lifting and maybe talking with China. I'm not saying that I'm totally against that, but I do not think we have an enough level of internal consultations. And Thai is a very instrumental example there. The way it was pushed through by the German presidency We may discuss it being good or bad for the EU economy and our resilience. I'm quite skeptical, but it raised quite a few eyebrows in Europe, and not only in Warsaw, but also in Rome, or in the Netherlands or Sweden and other countries too. On how do we actually form our EU foreign policy? Because China is a big thing. The way you deal with China affects, most of other important relationships, including, of course, the United States. And that's my general concern. It's not only about, meeting Xi Jinping once or twice. It's the general direction that the EU will take.
I would like to bring one question in that was raised here in the chat by Simon Rinas. So the China-Russia dimension. Jakub, you touched on it earlier, but maybe Ivana, maybe you can also, or Tamás, you can get into this a bit more. What are you seeing in terms of China-Russia collaboration? Is this being discussed enough at the European level at the moment? Is this of concern to the Eastern European countries? Is this something that particularly, maybe Tamás, from a military cooperation perspective, a lot of what we're seeing in the tech realm and the high tech and military cooperation realm, is that something that should be of greater concern to European governments, because it fundamentally has the potential to strengthen Russia or to bring China closer in terms of its security interest to European borders? Is there something that one of you would like to comment, Ivana?
I'm just thinking how to put it in a little bit in a parallel outside of our immediate Central European region. China was not seen as a threat in the Baltic countries until the joint military exercise in the Baltic Sea. So, and that was the change of the tide when suddenly it was not only Russia but also a potential of Russia-China cooperation or China itself, which started to be seen more as a threat. So, in our region, or at least in the Czech Republic, we do not see that much of a cooperation or immediate effects which would somehow raise it up or raise the alarm of the policy makers towards that. But what we do see, at least from my research agenda, we do see that there is a co-influence or confluence between Russia and China in influencing techniques, in disinformation campaigns. And that's something, of course, which is of great interest, because if China is learning from Russia, then we are in a huge trouble, because Russia, well, it comes with the techniques, it comes with the understanding of the region, understanding of the language, history, culture, and so on. But Russia doesn't have money, doesn't have financial resources, doesn't have artificial intelligence to back up the campaigns. But China has everything of that, all of that. So if there is actually a combo targeting our population, which may lead towards changes of the government, changes of the narratives, how we see European Union, how we see NATO, and so on, that's a huge problem. But so far, there was, I would say that there's a very little or limited awareness about these two actors cooperating and what kind of effects it may have.
Thank you, Ivana. Tamás, would you like to add?
Yeah, maybe a few words. So I guess many of you are aware that the literature tends to describe Chinese-Russian relationship with a very strange word, frenemies, which refers to the fact that on the short run and on the tactical level, China and Russia seem to be friends and kind of de facto allies, while on the long run and on the strategic level, they can easily turn into enemies again, at least in the long run. However, I do agree with Ivana that it is very dangerous that China is learning from Russia. So if you talk to Taiwanese experts, they always mention that all the influence campaigns that China has been conducting on the island, let me put this way, the methodology comes from Russia, and they are playing the Russian playbook, how to influence Taiwan. And I presume that sooner or later, all these techniques are going to be used, or maybe already in the use in Central and Eastern Europe as well. About the European status on that, I guess many of you have read the famous book of Brzezinski, the great chess book, or chessboard, if I'm not mistaken, where he was arguing that the West should work together with Russia because that's the the lesser danger compared to the other option, a Chinese-Russian alliance on the long run. So I know that especially for Central and Eastern European people, it's really hard to comprehend or even to imagine a de facto alliance with Russia. But it's right now, I don't really see it coming. Maybe a Russia after Putin, but that would be a very, very different topic. So I stop here.
Thank you, Tamás. And before we turn to our last question of what your imaginary goals would be in terms of ambitions of your respective country at the EU level, maybe one of the last questions that was raised here as well, that is a bit of a broader one, but how much do you think that China's rise as a geopolitical actor in the current sense will shape EU foreign policy over the coming years? How big of a factor would it be? Is this a bit of a inside the China bubble conversation where we do have the feeling that China is all over the place and is shaping all of the conversations, and we're talking 5G and green tech and climate change, and everywhere we see the China channeling mounting and bubbling up, and industrial policies now just about China and foreign policies just about China. Are we overdoing it, or do you think we're actually not stressing it enough yet? Who would like to go first? Jakob, I see you unmuted, so that's
okay. I think, I mean, I'm wholly inside the China bubble, so hard for me to, talk about Twitter outside of this bubble. But anyways, I think it's going to be a big deal. I mean, first of all, in terms of foreign policy, of course, there are other directions too. There are other Asian countries and so on, but the transatlantic relationship will be increasingly shaped by the issue of China. The fate of NATO will be shaped by the issue of China, and also the China-Russian relationship, which, by the way, contrary to what Tamás said, I perceive as heading towards a, fully functional alliance, but that's a different thing. But also in terms of how the EU is, constructed or reconstructed internally, because, the issue of China is affecting the EU regulations, or the debates on the EU regulations on competition, subsidies, state intervention, the structure of internal market, and especially France is very outspoken in terms of, that we need to allow German and French big corporations to merge to fight against China. But then the result for how the European market is structured will be tremendous, because we'll have, a very different internal situation. Same goes with, Germany providing their companies with huge subsidies to compete with China that none of other countries in Europe can afford to support their companies. So I think, I'm inside the China bubble, but I do really believe that it's going to affect the EU policy in general.
Ivana, what's your take?
I absolutely agree with Jakub. I don't think that we are talking about China yet to the level it actually deserves, because it's going to change not only how European Union is actually functioning or perceiving itself and its relationship with the outside world, but it's going to also affect, or it's already affecting, the global norms. Global norms, start with 5G networks and how we perceive the security of data flows, then go to vaccine diplomacy and think about the ethical standards of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable in science, whether you really need some consent in terms of crisis. And China didn't need consent to actually vaccinate the People's Liberation Army soldiers or civil servants just for the sake of testing the vaccine and so on. And you name it, you look at the United Nations resolutions, you look at the resolutions of United Nations Human Rights Council, and it's full of China infected language, or China implicit language of win-win cooperation and so on. So China is not only a global norms taker anymore, it's the shaper of the global norms, and we will be affected by that. And I don't think there's still enough of the realization of that in the European Union.
Tamás, would you like to add anything?
Well, excuse me that I'm always obsessed with Germany, but what I would like to add to this, that I think that the EU foreign policy will be heavily influenced by the next German government, and whether Germany decides to stand up to China or to pursue its selfish economic interest. I think that's the basic point, especially after Brexit. I'm not sure France can do anything about it alone, so probably it will also follow the lead of Germany. So wait and see.
Wait and see is always a good approach. I was going to ask a very quick question, whether there's any thoughts already on the little update that we've seen to the strategic outlook of 2019, that slightly more fierce language coming out of Brussels right now, and now more of a kind of take from the Brussels end, at least on positioning Europe slightly closer to the transatlantic conversation. I don't think it's not a massive step yet in that regard, but we do see the language has been tightened. If there are any quick thoughts on that, maybe one of you can also have a little comment. I see Ivana nodding, so maybe Ivana can.
I was not nodding. I absolutely refuse me nodding. No, definitely not. Yeah, I agree. It's not a massive change. It's I think it's hedging. It's hedging after TAI, and also signaling to Washington that perhaps we are not so in line with TAI. But well, so far difficult to comment on any impact. I would just say it's a rhetorical, like opening gesture towards Biden administration.
So let's go to our final round. Now you've had plenty of time to think while speaking, and because you're all think tankers, you can do two things at the time, to think about what do you think that your respective country could bring forward on the EU side in terms of an initiative when it comes to China, something that would be a high priority, but something where you can actually see some ambition. And I remember, Jakob, we've had this conversation many times before. Where is the ambition in the region to actually shape the conversation? Where is the leadership? And there's always the question of the looking towards Berlin, the looking towards Paris. Where are the alternative suggestions coming from? So if there were no political constraints, what would do you think should Poland push for, Jakob?
Well, I've started with this bliss of being, virtually independent from China's retaliation that I think many CE countries enjoy, and I would wish all European countries to have as a free hand to deal with China as we do. Of course, I'm over exaggerating now, but the Czech case that Ivana was talking about is instrumental. China was looking for ways to retaliate, but it had no easy way to do that. And if you compare this Czech case to Sweden or Australia, for that matter, you'll see that you didn't have it that much. So I think I would wish the EU to kind of, first of all, reduce EU's vulnerability towards China. I think it's there and it's affecting our policy, and Germany is the primary target. China wants to influence the EU through German vulnerabilities, including economic ones, in terms of value chains, the capital invested in China, and so on. And I think, unfortunately, TAI, which is, theoretically, in a perfect world, is a good thing. It's a good thing to have. But I would say that, EU should do it the other way around. We should first build, comprehensive set of instruments to increase our resilience, to just be able to defend ourselves from China's, weaponized interdependence. And then I think we can perfectly proceed with TAI-like agreements. But we first need to have to be sure that if China decides to retaliate, and it's increasingly doing just that, and quite openly, 10 years ago, the things that China does to Australia now were unthinkable in many ways. But now it's like an everyday basis, they just do it to everyone. And they're kind of, doing it with, white gloves when it comes to Germany, but still, I think the stakes are there. You know, the gun is hanging on the wall every time, and I think German elites are aware of that. So first of all, let's build resilience, and then we may talk about having an independent policy on China, because China is super resilient towards the EU. Our instruments are extremely limited, and we are, you know, asymmetrically open, and they can, you know, of course, there are some limits there. They're sometimes dependent on the EU companies and new technologies, but in so many ways they can just, you know, try to push us. So resilience first, and then we can talk about, you know, having an independent China policy.
Resilience first and fun later. Tamás.
Yeah, to second what Jakub just mentioned, I think when it comes to EU-China relations, I know it sounds a bit odd, but we tend to focus too much on China and not enough on the EU itself. So the EU announced that we are in competition with China. And when, you know, in sports, when you compete with someone, you don't talk about your opponent that much, but you try to do your best to better yourself, to exercise, to build resilience, and to be stronger, to be better, and so on and so forth. So I think it applies not only to the EU, but also to the United States of America, that the best way to compete with China is to better ourselves. So I cannot speak on behalf of the Hungarian government, and whatever I'm going to say is actually at odds with the strategy of the Hungarian government. But generally speaking, for such a small and open economy and the vulnerable country as Hungary is, it is definitely important to strengthen the integration of the EU, to deepen the integration of the EU, to pull together the EU itself, and I think we should pay a little bit more attention to make the EU stronger, because from the position of strength, then we can compete with China.
So China policy starts at home. Ivana, what is your take?
Well, I'm Euro-federalist, so I absolutely love what Tamás just said, that we need to strengthen integration. That's like music to my ears. But I also agree with Jakub as he was saying that the EU needs much more resilience, not only vis-à-vis China, but vis-à-vis Russia and vis-à-vis basically any hostile or malign influence there is, or they may be in the future. And we are so far very naive, so far very open, and so far not really willing to close the security loopholes we have in our societies by and large. And one more thing is that we tend to talk about very abstract things like resilience, like vulnerabilities, security, and so on. But I don't think that we should omit also human rights issues. It's not only moral obligation we have in a free world, but it's also a very good, as you said, Jakub, stick against China, and one of the very few ones we can use. So what I would like to see from the European Union is much more tougher stance on human rights issues, including on, let's say, Olympic Games in 2022.
Wonderful, and clarity from the EU. I think we have 3 good take-home points here from our 3 amazing panelists, who I would like to thank here. I think that Jakub said in the end, in a perfect world, Kai would be a good thing. We all know that it's a far from perfect world at the moment, but we also see that the seemingly unsurmountable differences between the EU members are actually not that big in the end in comparison to the challenge that is faced. And I do think that maybe these can be overcome, and that the EU is actually much more united around these questions than it seems. And I do think that conversations like this do help us make that reality check every once in a while. I would like to thank our fantastic translators that have done an amazing job in making this conversation not only available in English, but also in Polish. I would like to thank our fantastic team in the ECFR Warsaw office for putting this meeting together, and particularly like to thank Ivana Karásková, Tamás Matura, and Jakub Yakubovsky for spending their time with us. It was, as always, an enormous pleasure to talk to all of you, and these are the kinds of conversations that the China think tanker's heart is living for. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you all soon and in real life. That would actually be my wish for the future. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, and thank you for the moderation, Janka.
Thank you, Janka.
Perfect one. Thank you very much.
See you.
Bye.